You are now listening to You Heard.
On today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by Cynthia, who is an artist, but best known for her photography that is rooted in culture and aspects of her identity. Growing up on the border between Mexico and the United States shaped her Chicana identity, which was more developed through her work in global studies. A lot of her work has to do with border regions and immigration, and it became very prevalent in her photography and other artistry work that she has done. She has ongoing projects that have to do with the transitional landscape between Juarez and El Paso, Texas. And through her process of doing her art, she strives to foster appreciation and understanding of different regions. And her images are socially concerned and are centered on historic preservation. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me and You Heard today. I really look forward to having this topic that you're going to be bringing to us today for the community. I know it's one that is super relatable, and I'm looking to dive into it with you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Natalia. I'm excited to share my story and how that's been from my experience and how I grew up to my photography and now the current projects I'm working on. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
So I'll just start with my story and my background to give a foundation to work. So I was born in El Paso, Texas, right at the tip. It borders Juarez, Mexico, and it also borders New Mexico. So it's a little bit of a corner and it's a bubble of its own. And yeah, when I was little, I was born there, but for a little while, I did live in Mexico when, as a baby and was there for a bit. And eventually my family officially moved to the US seeking a better life and the American dream. It was a very interesting experience because most of my family was all still in Mexico. So while I was living in El Paso, I still went back and forth every weekend to my grandma's, or back in the day, both my grandmas, when my dad's side of the family, that grandma was still alive. But, it was, I didn't fully take it in all at the time until I grew up and I distanced myself from that area. But looking back at it, it really was this sort of mixing of different worlds of going back between the two. You see differences in socioeconomics, in the way the city is built. But back at that time, I didn't really think anything of it. The two cultures are very intertwined. There's people that either live in Juarez and work in El Paso and vice versa. A lot of crossing back and forth. I was bullied when I was younger and first started school. I was called like a Spanish kid or whatever it may be because I didn't speak English in the way other people did, which now I think that's hilarious because I'm like, I'm not from Spain. I'm from Mexico. I'm not a Spanish kid. If I could go back and tell people that. But then another experience that was super formative with me in that, I was in bilingual classes and in ESL and having that experience. And at one point when I was going into fifth grade, my mom behind my back moved me classes into an all English class. So I got to the first day of school and thinking I was going to go to Mr. Villarreal's class with all my friends. But really, I'm like, why am I in Miss Mansfield's class? Like, what happened? And so I found out from my mom that she behind my back went and did it. And she said, you know what? Like, I've been told that you're picking up the language really well. And I think you just need to go all in and you do this. I threw a fit. I probably really embarrassed her. I cried. I yelled in the hallways. I had to have like counselors or whatever force me to come into this class.
Oh my goodness. Hey, I would have reacted the same way.
I'm like, how could you do this to me? I didn't talk to my mom for a while. So dramatic. But in retrospect, it was funny because it was actually a really great decision she made for me. I ended up loving that teacher. She was, super important and, really developing my mind and where I was at. I ended up testing for like gifted and talented or whatever it may be, and just really set me up for my overachiever ways, but which there's many layers that ended up coming from that as well. But I always still joke with my mom, like, remember that time? She's like, yes. And At one point, I thanked her, but it's sad because it's true that there is still this sort of divisiveness will take you, within education. Though people might be learning English, having different access to different opportunities. Like if I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
been in that class, I wouldn't have been put into this like gifted and talented program or whatever it may be,
Right.
but I was no different.
Yeah.
Um, so, looking back at that, I'm like, there shouldn't be this sort of divisiveness within education. I don't know. I have a lot of opinions about many things, but
Tell me about it, especially when it comes to education. I mean,
yes,
I work in education, and the thing is that like that experience that you had hasn't changed.
it
So it's
hasn't.
like the fact that we haven't progressed from when I was in the fifth grade, the third grade, kindergarten, whatever it may be, just shows that, our education isn't necessarily there to save, to not to save, to serve the ever changing face of, the kids that are coming through those hallways. It's, just kind of to serve what they want to serve, as we know, when it comes to privilege and who's in power. So it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And I think one of the, for me, coming down here and seeing how education is played down here, I was definitely taken aback. So mind you, I'm in Houston, I'm from New York City, and just like the divide of people in education, and like you said, like what they have access to. Now mind you, I work as a recruiter, so I'm in the high schools. So by this point, a good majority of the students that I'm working with are able to navigate themselves in English, are taking all English classes. They aren't in an ELL class or an ESL class the way that you were when you were younger. So they've gone through education and have mastered whatever they may have mastered in regards to the language that they're supposed to quote unquote have a handle over.
Hmm.
But that divide still exists, even though this is no longer a language barrier situation. It is a actual educational barrier. And like what you were saying, it's like, well, now I had access to this gifted and talented opportunity. How those opportunities still don't present themselves, even when they technically are in the position to be presented. So I feel you on that one.
Or even the pockets of who your friends end up being or how you surround yourself and all of those experiences. But going off of that into education. So, I carried that through experiences after fifth grader, from middle school into high school. And then once I, was in high school, I was told, okay, you got to go to college, you got to do all these things. And,
Mm-hmm.
even access to, people to support, to do applications. It's middle school and on, my parents were getting divorced. So I just, instead of wanting to be home and deal with the situation going on, then I just became overly involved and
Yeah.
just wanted to just do all of the things. And, I've heard that, if you're involved and then you go to college and then you're going to do these things. And I don't think I ever really turned that off afterward. But
Yeah.
I ended up going to St. Edward's in Austin. And then once I moved from El Paso and then went there, it was a total culture shock, and realizing that I
I'm
grew up in this
sure.
beautiful Mexican American bubble and had to adjust to what that's like. I've always been into photography.
Mm-hmm.
So like since I was a little kid, that was always my creative outlet. And I decided I wanted to study photography to be the next National Geographic photographer
I
and
love
travel the
it.
world. and did international relations too. And that's also where a lot of the kind of my thinking and realizing all of the different things that play into the place that I came. So it was interesting for me to distance myself from where I grew up to fully understand it more.
Right.
Removing myself from that space was very formative, and thinking, wow, okay, like, I see how this shaped me. I see how I am. I see border that people don't understand. A lot of these like political talks, started elevating at that time while I was in school, and people talking about immigration and all these things going on at the border. And I would ask, like, have you been there? Do you
Right.
even know what it looks like? Do you know what this sort of culture, like, there isn't this divisive that you're pinning it to be. And so, I thought my photography was more of like, I'm gonna go to other countries and I'm gonna take these photos, etc. But really, it was like I wanted to just show that to other people. So,
Mm-hmm.
I focused my work into that, just bring that forward and paint a
Yeah.
picture. My senior work ended up, I mean, there's still this giant 6 foot by 2.5 feet photo that I took from the border that was taking on a large format camera, and it was all manual and all film, and I took it by hand. I developed the film by hand, and it is in my living room. I still carry that in my space, and everything I put in my space to show that, just to stay connected.
I completely understand that feeling, especially like coming from a place that is so much a part of who you are and your reality and the reality of the people that are around you, and then going to a space that is so disconnected from that and just like doesn't understand the, I guess, pretty much like the world in which you come from. Either A, because they haven't been, or like maybe they just kind of passed through. They just don't understand
Hmm.
the livelihood. And now, given I like you were in within the same state. I was within the same area of the United States, but going from New York City and then going to the college that I went to, it was very much that, like that same sense of energy of like, oh, I mean, I've always appreciated being a New Yorker and understood what that came with, but it really just dug deep and became a lot more potent once I went to Villanova, because my reality and my world and the people that I grew up with were so starkly different than the
Yeah.
majority of the student body. And not even just on campus, but off campus as well. Like the university is located in one of the richest neighborhoods on the East Coast. And it's like super old money, and you can like walk off the campus and there's just like huge mansions that are just like acres and acres of land, and they probably have like 50 different rooms, but only 3 people live in that house. And it was just, in New York City, we live on top of each other. So it's like,
Yeah.
what is this huge house and this huge lawn? And like, why do you have a gate? And like, what are these things? And, it was stuff that I only saw in the movies or on shows. Like the biggest mansion I ever saw was on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And it was because it was some kid from the hood in Philly that like went to go live with his rich family in
Bel
California.
Air.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just kind of like, that was my only understanding of it. And now here I am like mingling with these people. And I was like, shit, I feel like Will Smith. And mind you, like the university I went to is probably like less than 10 miles away from the high school that he went to. So like I kind of felt like that, of that constant tension that he has in the show where, he holds his West Philly-ness with him all the time, but there's everything that's around him that's essentially like asking him to be less of who he is, and to like stop being so loud, stop being so colorful, stop being so this, stop being so
Yeah.
that. And it was that of like, I'm in a space that pretty much asks me to quiet my presence. I'm like, I'm cool, I'm smart, I deserve to be here, so on and so forth. But at the same time, like I'm taking up too much space. And I feel like because of that, I heightened myself and my New Yorkness and everything that I kind of carried with me while I was there, because it was like, I'm not going to like allow you to attack this, and I want you to be able
Hmm.
to understand like why I am the way that I am, and why growing up the way that I grew up was something that was beautiful. And like literally, like what you just said, every project I ever did, every paper I ever wrote, any piece of art that I put out, I was a communication major, any kind of
Hmm.
research that I did within, like qualitative and quantitative research, always tied back to like being a New Yorker, growing up the way that I grew up, socioeconomic status, and how that played a role in my identity,
Hmm.
and the way in which that I carried myself. And I took like a bunch of different public speaking classes and stuff, and all my speeches were always surrounded by that. And I always felt this need to like educate the people around me, because they just lived in their own bubble. Like I came from my bubble, and I need to let you know about my bubble, because your bubble's a little too thick for me. So
Yes.
I understand that like tension where you grow up having this like very worldly view, and you see yourself wanting to go here, there, and the third. And yeah, you don't ever really lose that. But when you're put into a place that kind of threatens your identity and dismisses it in many different ways. As if it's not like valid or enough, you feel this like need to kind of like turn the fire on high and just be like, nope, nope, now I'm going to shove it down your throat and like make you understand and appreciate the beauty that came with where I came from. And I kind of, to the points that you were making, there's I guess a stereotype or like one kind of version that people understand about the border, or one kind of version that people understand about New York. And it's like, well, there's so much more than what you're seeing in the movies or what you're seeing in the news. So I'm going to show you like the border life or the New York life that I know. So you understand that it's a lot deeper than this like very surface level stereotypical understanding of what my home is.
Yes, exactly. And people still carry that and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I do my part if you're interacting with me to know that that is not true? And having to, bring that into a space. I love your example of saying, well, your bubble's too thick for my bubble. Like 100%, that is very much the situation in which we have to live, and everyone's experiences are different, and between New York and this area. And then, and same thing for me. Like I was still within Texas. Like I was just going 8 hours away from this. But even within that, I was cutting my hair the other day, or had my first post-COVID haircut, and the hairdresser I was talking to, she said, "Oh, like El Paso." She said, my high school teacher told me that it smells, and I'm like, "What? Like
That
what? Like
First
what?"
of all, why would you even bother telling me that? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Like, what? Yeah. And he said, yeah, I heard it's stinky. And I'm like, what do you mean it's stinky? It's not stinky. Like, how could a whole like city area be stinking, but you just identify by that? And she said, yeah, well, my high school teacher told me that it's like the armpit of Texas. I'm like, what? Like, does he mean that because it's like in the corner in the way this is shaped? Or, and I said, no, like it's not an armpit and it's not smelling. I'm sorry that you were given that view of this place that I so love, but it's actually really beautiful. So I pulled up some pictures and then I said, it has mountains, it's a desert, like let me show it to you. And so I had, some of this photography that I took were just ready to go from my
Oh,
Instagram, and said,
like,
like,
let
please take
me
a look
show
at this.
you.
Let me show you. Yes. But it's like, you never know, like when you are going to have to kind of carry those lessons. I was just cutting my hair, like not thinking that I was going to have to, sit down and have this educational time. This might at least paint a different picture for you because it's not smelly and it's not an armpit.
Yeah, and it's
It's
you defending your identity, and
yes.
because I mean, we all New Yorkers get told that New York stinks all the time, but we gotta own it because it does. Like it smells. There are plenty of places that straight up smell, but like we take that with pride. So it's a little bit different, but I understand this. Like we're, I think for me in that situation, you're a lot better than I am because I wouldn't be showing pictures to her. But just like the sense of ignorance that people are comfortable exuding
Yes.
when talking about other people's identities, of like, well, this person told me, or my understanding of it is, but have never experienced it themselves. Like, we should not be talking from a place that you don't know, especially when it's something that has to do with somebody else's identity. Like,
Exactly.
you can't make claims on shit you don't know. So the fact that she had oh, well, it's a girl. So the fact that she had the ovaries to be like, so I heard it smells is wild.
Funny because then I told her, well, your teacher is rude, this and that, and she's like, yeah, I guess they are rude. Oh, like you taught me something today. I'm like, well, yeah, like why is this person that is in the speak going back to this whole education thing, like in this
Mm.
educational space, even presenting you with those ideas, and sharing that, like that's the only thing this person knew about here. And then this is like San Antonio, and granted, like San Antonio is different than Austin, and it has a lot more
Yeah.
Latinx people, and there is more cultura here than there. But even then, like you would think, like, oh, I'm not gonna just go around making these claims. But yeah, all interesting stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, so I really took, this whole experience of who I am and into my college time. I was grateful, though, that I did go to a liberal arts institution that
Mm-hmm.
allowed me to be like, I think I became more of who I am by being that, but by having to realize, oh, there's people that aren't like me, and I have this really special upbringing that you might not have. And it actually made me own and lean more into that and just like really carry to that. Like, everyone knew within my classes that I was like the border gal that
Yeah.
would like always kind of bring that through. So I just carried that everywhere. A difficult situation at some point within college. I was in a really bad car accident. I was
Mm.
rear-ended by a bus, and it led to a really traumatic couple of years. I was diagnosed with PTSD from it, with PCS, which is post-concussive syndrome, like what football players get. Like a lot of
Wow.
doctors didn't
Yeah.
really know what to do with me. So I'll just say you have this thing that I don't really know what to do with. I just had a doctor tell me like, oh, you're just going to have to take drugs for the rest of your life. And
Great. Thanks.
thanks. I'm like, great. Like, fun. I guess I'll figure out what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point that I had 3 different therapists and, like a pain management person, a counselor within school, and then a psychiatrist. I ended up getting put on this like pain med that had sort of antidepressants. So then that added another layer for me of another world to navigate, because
Yeah.
in the Latinx culture, there's not a lot of talk about assisted therapy and like knowing that there's a lot of, trauma that's just like someone absorbs and takes forward and doesn't really take the time to really dive into it and heal from
Mm-hmm.
it. And so, carrying all that plus my identity, so that added a whole another layer of things. And so, it was hard to try to navigate that too, especially within nowadays, there's this like big hustle culture, but that's always existed with the Latinx community of like, you
Mm-hmm.
work hard, you do things, and that's just what you do. So navigating all that added another layer that then, shifted some of my work in that I was doing at the border. Like I had to literally change my process within my art. I couldn't be carrying these giant cameras and spending all this
Mm.
time. And physically, it just altered how I was even going to keep my photography work. And then I did some work related to that. It actually took me a lot of years before I even showed any of it, or I took photos of, the doctor visits that I was going to. It was a really sad period of my life. It's hard to even, I'm even surprised I'm talking about it right now.
Yeah. Well, I
So,
appreciate you sharing regardless. So thank you
yeah,
for being vulnerable about it.
I did some work related to that, and it just completely shifted where I was at and where I wanted to go. Plus, adding several other layers of life and figuring out where that was going to take me. As I mentioned, I thought I was just going to disappear into the world and live who knows where in Latin America, because
Right.
I got so obsessed with the history and everything and how everyone comes to be. And I can talk about immigration patterns and all of the things, but that by the time I was done with school, and again, I was super grateful for the place I did attend, because they really just held me through it. Like I think had I been at a bigger institution, I wouldn't have been able to graduate. Like,
Yeah.
and I would have just gotten lost in the system.
Mm-hmm.
But once I was done, I realized, well, I spent all this time crafting my photography work, but now I don't think I can do that physically. And I did a lot of work within marketing, or just like in the different things I involved myself as a student. I was always the communicator and, sharing emails or sharing things, or even a little bit of design. My now husband also went to St. Ed's with me, and so he studied that, and so I just got into that. And so I thought, well, I think maybe a better track for me to go toward is marketing and communications, because it's
Okay.
not gonna like require physical abilities for me to be on my feet all day as a photographer. So it totally shifted where I thought I would end up. But in retrospect, it was now I'd become interested in marketing, because in my mind, that is another creative space that takes more of that creativity plus an analytical side. I thought, okay, this is exciting. I want to mix the two. I decided to go back and pursue my MBA. Like I felt like I wanted to take that back, like those years that I was cheated. Well, not cheated, because I was, dealing with something so traumatic, but wanted to, balance this creativity that I learned. It's crazy to me that I even went in the business direction, because at one point I was like, I'm just going to be an artist. And,
Yeah.
with the stereotypes that come from that too, of like being like, oh, there's concern that you will even make money as a,
Right.
starving artist, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I did my MBA. I finished that this last August, which the last couple
Woohoo.
months were in the middle of COVID. So that was another layer of crazy. There's something like only 4% of Latinos that have a graduate degree. Don't fully quote me on the number. I think it's somewhere
Mm-hmm.
along the line. I think it's a couple years old, but I was proud to have beat those odds and then navigate that with, the different experiences that I had and the different identity dichotomies that I had to, navigate back and forth, which business adds a whole nother layer to that as well. Within art, I could just easily mix that in. But then in the business world, it comes back with what you were mentioning of the, code switching and trying to figure out like, okay, which piece of myself gets to be visible within these spaces. So that's still something I'm trying to learn and figure out as I take that forward.
Or even
So,
just like to find the space where you no longer feel the need to code switch, that
yes,
regardless of how much of your full self you bring to the table,
exactly.
that like whatever you're bringing to the table is what matters. That you being a little bit more of this facet of yourself doesn't make you any less valuable or worth this other person or people's time. I know that that's definitely something that I don't know if I know that I have code switched, but I also know that I've always been conscious and annoyed of my code switching. So I force myself to be more of myself as much as I possibly can. But having moved to Texas, that has become increasingly more hard because I deal with a lot more conservative people in my
Hmm.
position. And mm, I, it's hard to fully present myself in my extreme non-conservativeness uh in order for
Yeah.
me to like get my job done. So I understand that like tension because you want to just like be yourself and present yourself and understand that you in your most rawest form of you is more than enough and fine in all spaces, but um can very easily turn people off in professional spaces when you're trying to get your job done or you're trying to put money in your pocket to be able to do X, Y, and Z other things.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of networking within the Latinx tech community and like managing all those different things of like how do I best bring fully who I am, but also, it's different when you're from a different cultural perspective that
Mm-hmm.
some people like, I mean, just to give an example of myself, like my career goals are not to be like, oh, I want to be wealthy for myself because I want to buy myself all of these things. Like I
Right.
am not that way. I'm like, my financial goals are to be, debt free to support my family and have like a paved way. Like if you need to rely on me, like I'm gonna have this little mother-in-law house in the back of my house. So whoever may
Mm-hmm.
need to live there could potentially live there, like those are different things of the financial space too that you also see that like not everyone would have that sort of mindset, because there is the cultural part of like what
Yeah.
you're bringing to the table and then what is in your space outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure, in some situations, like, oh, well, you could get X salary, but it's just you and you like, oh, well, you are getting a salary. It must be nice. Like you're just you and your husband. Like you don't have any other people to support. I'm like, excuse me, I actually do. Like I send
Yeah.
money to my abuela in Juarez and
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to whatever my mom may need, etc. It's a whole another layer. And, but yeah, the more and more I continue navigating these different spaces. I'm just finding myself that there's all these, and after college too, I got married, and then there was the culture parts too of being like, okay, well, these are the Mexican traditions that are part of this, like within the culture, and then there's these other layers, and then as you kind of progress, and I've become more like, where am I really from? Like neither here nor there. Like there's a quote that says, "Ni de aquí ni de allá." Like I'm might not be as like Mexican for Mexicans or like
Mm-hmm.
not as American for the Americans. And I'm just navigating who I am. Like, there's the quote in the Selena movie where the dad is telling her, we got to be more Mexican than the Mexicans and more American than the Americans, and both at the same time. And, figuring out, okay, like what are the pieces of myself that I'm just trying to put together and then move forward. Like I'm still super close to my family, and they know, like, we talk every single weekend. It's like, I mean, back in the day was going to see them every weekend, but now it's just conversations. But,
Right.
I find myself losing Spanish at some point, and I'd be like, Mama, ¿cómo se dice? Like, da, da, da. Like, and so it's funny seeing how the progression of all these things and, grown from that and taking to that and trying to put those pieces together to be just who I am.
Yeah. And it's like showing up to all parts of yourself. It's like you may have lost words in Spanish, but that doesn't make you any less Mexican or border girl or however you want to call it. Like you are everything all at once because you were born into it, and there's nothing that can necessarily take that away from you. And the way in which you practice certain things or display yourself or talk or don't talk, doesn't make you anything less than what you were born into or what was thrusted upon you. I recently had this conversation of identity with another guest of mine who focused on her like Filipino American New Yorker
Mm-hmm.
identity, and is also a bone cancer survivor, and how in kind of like every facet of her identity, pretty much like it was never the way in which she performed that part of her identity was never to like what the overarching image of that identity is of like, well, this is what a Filipino is supposed to be, and this is what like a Filipino American is supposed to be, and this is what a New Yorker is supposed to be, and like the way in which that
Mm-hmm.
she carried herself didn't necessarily fit that. So the question is like, does that make you like not a New Yorker Filipino American? And it's like, no, like you are, because it just is like you were born into it, and like accepting your whole self for that, and not putting yourself in the position where you feel like you're less or you lack because the way in which you perform your identity may not necessarily match somebody who can use the same words to identify themselves the way that you can.
Yes, 100%. And taking all those layers to just be who I am. And, that is part of that. I'm not this or that. I'm just all of this all together with different parts. And it might not look the same way as someone else. And that's okay. I still see that, come through. Or even it was really interesting to also experience that when preparing for marriage and the
Yeah.
different things that I took and didn't take, like from that are cultural. Like I'm like, oh no, like I'm not going to wear a veil because
Mm-hmm.
that like I I really take into account like symbols to be like, this is how I'm going to
Yeah.
present myself, and this is how I choose to partake in this part of my culture, and then this is a piece I am leaving behind on purpose. And so that's another layer to navigate. Like I think of a story that my tias were all in shock that I was not planning to wear a veil
Mm-hmm.
to my Catholic Mexican American wedding in Austin. I got married actually at my school. And it was funny because, they had a lot of different opinions. Like, they're like, well, aren't you doing the arras, and aren't you doing the veil, and aren't you doing, I forgot what all the different things. And I told them, like, actually, that's not a requirement within the Catholic Church. Like, that's just the Mexican traditions. And they're like, oh, what? I'm like, yeah, these aren't required here in the US. And they're like, how could that be? Like, and I said, I might do some of them, like culturally speaking, because I really value my culture and how that's brought
Right.
me, but I'm not going to do all of it. One is like the arras, in which you present, the man is supposed to give you these like coins,
Mm-hmm.
and then say, like, I am here, I'm going to be the financial supporter of this family, essentially. And I said, nope, like, not doing that because
Yeah.
I make money too. Like, this is a partnership. Like, I'm not here to just be like, oh, I can't do anything for myself. So we're like, yeah, no, we're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Unless you are presenting coins to each other, you're out.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I was just like, man, I'm not necessarily like, we're a partnership. Like, nope, delete. And then
Yes.
there was the veil part in there, and I said, like, I'm not wearing a veil. And then they're like, what? Like, how could you not? Because I looked it up, and it usually, like, they'll put the veil on the face, and then you get to
Mm-hmm.
the altar or whatever. It's like lifted off your face. And I found out that that means like that's the first time you are like presented as a woman to the world. Like that is when you are first seen. And I said, what? Like, no, like I've
Yeah.
been a woman all of this time. You are telling me that I haven't existed before getting married. Like, I'm not doing that. So it was so funny to like go back and tell my Theas, like, yeah, like this is what this means. Did you know this is what it means, or are you just doing it to do it? And I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
that because I am this new version of all of the things that are me mixed with, there's this obviously like embedded like machismo culture within some perspectives of the Mexican culture. And then there's like feminism, and some of those can clash, or, there's like even culturally, like back within like religion as well. So I said, I'm not partaking in this parts of it, and I'm gonna decide what parts of my culture I want to keep and I don't. I ended up did wear one last minute just because I thought it looked good and it covered my back, but I didn't like put it on my face. I just used
Right.
it as an accessory. So
Exactly.
they're
Like,
like,
this is
okay,
cute and I'm wearing it
yeah,
because it's cute and that's it.
and that's it. Like, I'm not gonna have it cover my face. I'm not gonna do anything crazy like that. And so it's still been interested in, navigating all those pieces and how I'm even taking all of those things and moving forward as I grow. Back in the time was okay, how is this presenting itself in my art? And now it's like, how is this presenting itself in my work and my entrepreneurial ideas and how I live my life. So yeah, it's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about being intentional and
Exactly.
not doing things because you're supposed to or just because you're like moving with emotions. I know that like the conversation of marriage and like how our like ceremony and stuff has always been a conversation between my partner and I. We're currently not married.
Hmm.
I think we're like married by law because we've lived
Yeah.
each other for 3 years, but my family's not like conservative. They're not religious or anything like that. They didn't care that, we had a baby out of wedlock or anything like that. But my family's very big in regards to like presentation and how things are presented and how
Hmm.
people see them. Not that they're worried about like being judged. They're just very like flashy. And I'm here for it because I'm super dramatic and I'm flashy myself. So I totally understand. But like you, it's like, okay, well, what are we being flashy about? Like, what are we doing these things for? And
Hmm.
my mom, when she got married to my father, had a very big opulent, like over the top wedding that people still talk about. Like when they used to still make wedding videos, everybody and their mother still has this wedding video because it was like the wedding of the century. What she wore, how dramatic it was. They had a high mass. Like St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is a famous cathedral that most people know, and like just drama, 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 and it was beautiful and it was great and everybody had a good time, which was awesome. But and I understood why my mom did a high mass. Again, like she's not religious or anything, doesn't really practice like the Catholic faith or anything like that. But she did it because her grandmother was very religious and would like pray
Hmm.
like for 5 hours a day or something along
That's my
those lines.
grandma.
Yeah, and was just like, she did it out of like honoring the people who couldn't be there at the wedding because they had passed away. So when I do talk about when my partner and I are, eventually going to get married and what that's going to look like, I remember telling her that I didn't want to get married in a church. And she looked at me like, why? And I was like, exactly why? Like, why would I? Because I wasn't raised in the church. You didn't raise me that way. So why am I
Yeah,
going to get married in an institution that isn't involved in my life at all?
exactly.
And as time has progressed, my partner and I have been together now for 5 years and we have a kid now. She's about to be 1.5, and obviously our perspectives have changed about like what we want that ceremony to be, and what means to like what is important to us, and how far separated that is from what marriage is usually displayed to be like, and how our own respective parents did their own marriages, and what they believe in, and how conservative and not conservative they are. Like, I have no desire to wear a dress. And I like asked my mom if because she still has her wedding dress. Mind you, she's been divorced from my father for like eons at this point. But I asked her and I was like, can I tailor your dress and take certain pieces of it to make a cape? And she's like, a cape at your wedding? And I'm like, yeah, like I want a really dramatic cape, and we're not going to exchange rings, we're going to exchange crowns, because it's our empire and we're coming together and doing this, that, and the third.
Awesome.
And like we're not going to have any kind of like religious anything, because again, him and I we're just not like that. So we're asking one of our really close friends to like get certified to be able to officiate the wedding. And like it's very personal, and it's to us, and it's about the things that matter to him and I in our relationship. And for my mom, because it isn't like in the scope of what a like flashy wedding's supposed to look like, the way that hers was, she's like, well, I'm not going to be involved. And I'm like, Mom, like, no, you're going to be more than involved, but understand, like, we are taking this to what means something to us and has to do with our identity and our love and how we want to perform that. And us performing something and being something and displaying something that isn't us and that isn't our relationship, doesn't sit well with us. It doesn't, what kind of foundation are you setting if you're putting on a display that isn't you? And to like take that idea in everything you do, whether it be work, whether it be home at your family, whether it be in your art, the question is the way in which is how you're performing true to you. And if it's not, then, is it really yours? Like, how true is it if it's not necessarily an extension of yourself? So I definitely can relate to that, to you being like, well, I'm not going to do this because I don't believe in this. But there are things that are a part of me and who I am and are part of my culture that are important, that I will, go out and celebrate, or I'm going to wear the veil because it's cute, and that's it.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of that, exactly what you're saying, of just being like, if we're going to present ourselves in this way, these are the parts that we want as a part of it, and this is what we're leaving behind. Or I can definitely relate to the opinions too that come from that, of how your mom was saying. We had a lot of that, because we had like food truck that we love from Austin as our food. It's P. Terry's, it's burgers.
I've heard about this food truck so many times, Cynthia. It's not even
so
funny.
Good.
So it makes me want to get married in Austin just so I can have this food truck. I wasn't even at your wedding, and I know that it was amazing.
All like with our family was like shocked, like, how could you not serve like a plated dinner? And we're like, that's not us. That's what we like to eat. Like, and it's funny because to this day they're like, they loved it. Like, we just took, as you were saying, like the different pieces that we felt were us. And we were very, very intentional of every single thing that was a part of that, like of how we wanted to be presented, how we wanted. I'm very much a feminist, and I'm still Latina, and I'm still Catholic, and all these things. So like, I've seen there's a lot of like within, I feel like now we're totally diving into this whole like marriage partnership thing. But we had, I've seen like even in invitations, they'll be like, come to the, like, it really upsets me when you see like Mr. and Mrs., like the guy name, and like the woman's name is totally like, that is like my biggest pet peeve. Like, do not write to me and say like Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Zubia. Like, I have a name. Hello.
You exist.
So, I exist. And so, all of our invites and everything were just like, come to the wedding of Anthony and Cynthia. And like, that was it. Like, there wasn't like a Mr. and Mrs., his name, or like when we're going to be introduced, we're like, okay, you're going to introduce us as Cynthia and Anthony. Like, hello, we're here. And so 100%, being intentional of like, presenting yourself and like how that is and who you want to be. And, we still navigate all of those things within our culture, and then being married and etc.
Yeah. And it's like, again, it comes back to the point that we've made kind of across this episode of just like the intersectionality. You can be all of these things and you can be all of these things fully, but either performing or not performing certain aspects doesn't make you anything less of these titles and communities that you identify with. And like being okay with being a part of so many different things and cultures and aspects and little divots of society, because it just allows you to be the like full complex human that you are. We're not meant to just be carbon copies of each other as much as society tries to make us be carbon copies of each other. But we're meant to be different. Like that's what impacts this world, is the things that we're able to bring to the table that are evolved from whatever has happened from before. That allows us to have this sense of freedom that maybe didn't exist for us and our people or our family before we came into the picture and had the opportunity to actually exercise a sense of individuality and a sense of freedom, and still be able to keep the security of self and community and love and support that back then may have not necessarily been there, because you were kind of forced into behaving and looking and being just one way in order to maintain a sense of security. So just being able to accept that and move past that and embrace your whole self in all walks of life, and do it intentionally. But as we're closing out this episode, I want to give you a moment to kind of just deliver a message or affirmation or something that you want to share with the audience as they listen to the end of this episode. What's something that you hope that everybody walks away with?
You can be all aspects of yourself in many different forms, and sometimes your life doesn't take the exact direction that you envisioned would happen, but as long as you're true to who you are and you always remember where you come from, and you take your identity and put all those pieces together, even when they may seem opposite of each other, you will head in the right path and continue evolving in that way as long as you reflect on that. That is very much my experience, and I often still surprise myself in thinking, okay, well, what am I now, and where has this led me? And I always reflect and realize there's always somewhere to point to where I came from and who I am, and growing up in the border and then carrying that to what I am now. Starting off in only photography to then marketing to now business, and the different ideas of different businesses I want to pursue. And I reflect back and realize that the experiences I had relate to it in some way. For example, my family is all very entrepreneurial and have these, always like hustling and selling, or like my grandpa used to sell jewelry, and I'm like really into minimalist gold jewelry. It's different, but it all kind of trickles back in some way, and putting all that together. Be all of who you are in any space that you take.
You are now listening to You Heard.